Hello everybody, my name is Sniping is Fun. And welcome you back to my next top 10 list for the month of October for Halloween. And we already talked about the family-friendly Halloween games. Now we're going to jump into the spooky, the creepy, the horror. We're going to do the top 10 best horror video games you can currently play for Halloween right this very second. Which, just like my family-friendly list, has to mean that the games have to be available at the very least on current day gen hardware, 9th gen Switch, PS5, and Xbox Series SX, or at the most a generation back, because a lot of 8th generation systems either still are getting games, or at the very least these games might be available on them. The Wii U, PS4, Xbox One, PS Vita, the 3DS, something of that nature. Horror games, the true horror, M-rated, violent, scary, creepy games. We're going to be talking to all of you today. And as you can see, I'm doing the same thing I did last time. It is, for you, right space center. You're seeing it just regular. I am seeing stuff backwards, and I am in the process of learning how to write stuff backwards, I guess. So let's learn the process together. Okay. So the first game I'm going to go with, number 10 on this list, is going to go to a game that's only recently come out, a remake of a game that's only just come out, I think it was last year. And it's a remake of a game from the 7th generation. And that's going to go to the Dead Space remake. The original Dead Space came out, I believe, around 2007, 8-ish on the 360 and PS3. It was a creepy as hell game. It was essentially Resident Evil in space. It was probably at the time one of the best horror games. And I'm going with the remake because while the remake might not be as good in some aspects, it's an improvement in others. And definitely, if you want to get in that Halloween spirit through horror video games in this current day era, the Dead Space remake is there for you. It is a great game. They handled the remake quite well. It's available on everything practically right now outside of Switch, which at some point in time, probably on the Switch 2, we're probably going to see Nintendo get that game. And like I said, for the most part, the remake actually kind of handled everything a little bit better. There's some things I would say are better than the original, but overall, if you want a really good horror game that's set in space, and we're not getting no Dead Space 4 anytime soon, and or any other space pretty much horror game for the most part, that game is one I would strongly recommend for all of you to play. With that being said, let's get on to number 9. And number 9 is going to go to this game, which is a new phenomenon. Like the franchise that's only, I think, came out last generation. Actually, I shouldn't even say franchise. It's one single game, and it's kind of made a name for itself through like all the DLC it gets, and it's something for Halloween for horror that you all can play together because it's an online game, and that goes to Dead by Daylight. It's essentially like an online survival horror type of game. There's all these original monsters you can play as. There's people that you can play as the monster. You can play as the survivor trying to survive. It's a big online game. It's made a big enough impact to get so many crossovers. There's Resident Evil crossover. There's Friday the 13th. There's like Michael Myers, Halloween. They got freaking like Nicolas Cage. It's so many, if you want it, Ghostface and everything. There's so many crossovers for DLC they have in this game, like from licensed ones, and then you get a lot of original monsters and original creatures. It's so much variety, and it's something that if you want to play a very, very more creepy horror-esque game, but you don't want to play a single-player game, you want to find something you can play with your friends and family online, I would strongly recommend that. And it's still going to this day. They're still getting DLC to it, so it still definitely has a very strong community in the game. Now let's go on to number 8. Number 8 goes to, and this isn't necessarily a horror game, but it is a very creepy game. So it is, like my list does technically, like, I have to, like, a little bit change stuff up just to kind of make certain games fit, but this would not fit family friendly. But it's not necessarily a horror game, but it's close enough without actually full on being it, despite the fact that it is a very, very uncomfortably creepy game. And that goes to Little Nightmares. In particular, the first one, because the first one's the only one I've played. Little Nightmares 2 I haven't played yet, and that's still very new. So if you like the first one, I would strongly recommend you go play the second one, but go play the first one. It's such a cult classic that's only like a generation old now. You're going around trying to survive all these creepy, monstrous people and trying to survive, make it through the puzzles and stuff. And I forgot exactly what dev team made this game, but Little Nightmares was such like a moment to play something like that and like get engrossed in the atmosphere. And it's very, very creepy. It's definitely something that's a good thing to play for Halloween, for like spooky season. And Little Nightmares, I would recommend the first one. If you enjoy it, play the second one. I didn't mention this earlier with the list, but this list is specifically, unlike the Halloween family-friendly one, where I cheated like 4 times saying multiple games in the series. This is 1 game per series. The honorable mentions will be where I kind of jump into stuff. So there you go. I picked the first one over the second one. So let's get on to number 7. And number 7 is going to this game because it is pretty much one of the creepiest games I have played in forever, and my cousins definitely played this, and this game is, like, during that time frame when, like, Resident Evil was slowly starting to get back into being horror, when it fell too much into action, this kind of fit that gap for a minute, and I'm going with Evil Within. Evil Within is one of the creepiest, spookiest games I've ever played. I'm particularly saying the first one. The second one is not as good as the first. If you like the first one, and you want to play more of it, I would say play the second one. The second one is not as good as the first. The first one is such a cult classic. It's so creepy, atmospheric. It's like playing Resident Evil without playing Resident Evil, except it's more like Silent Hill. It's like Resident Evil if it was trying to be more like Silent Hill than Resident Evil. It has such interesting characters, such a dark atmosphere. If you want to be creeped out, play this game in the dark, and you're going to be like scared out of your mind. This game is so good. I recommend it strongly. So let's get into number 6. And number 6 is going to go to not one single one, but since it comes in a collection now, I have to count it as one entry. So that might be cheating to some of you, but it's my list. And since it comes together, I'm going to count it. But it's been around since 2000 and I think 2010, 2011, and they've done multiple seasons of it. And when I think of Halloween and I think of horror nowadays, this franchise has been one of the biggest things to come out of like horror in like forever. And that's the Walking Dead franchise. And the Telltale Walking Dead franchise with the definitive series, the whole collection. They have the whole series now in one convenient collection. And you got like 4 seasons, you got the 400 days, you got the Michonne DLC. You can get everything now in one complete package. And while some of the seasons, 3 and 4, are not as good as the other ones, they all are a complete package. You like watching The Walking Dead, you like reading the graphic novel The Walking Dead, definitely play this if you have not played this yet. It's a strong recommendation, and it could get you easily through spooky season. We're finally in the top 5, and this next one goes to a collection as well. An older collection, but a collection worth it all the same. And it is going to go to the Silent Hill HD collection, Silent Hills 2 and 3. I know some people are going to come to me and talk about I should have put Silent Hill 2 Remake as the Silent Hill option on this list. And the only reason I did not do that is because This is a complete package. I know it's only available on the 360, which you can still buy on your Xbox Series S and X. So it kind of limits who can play this unless you have a physical version of it on PS3 still. So, but it's still available on the Xbox. And you get Silent Hill 3, which is conveniently probably one of the best Silent Hills, and Silent Hill 2, which is still one of the best Silent Hills. And while it's technically not as good as the remake, I think there's certain elements that in the original are better than the remake. And you're getting 2 games for the price of 1. And in my opinion, that's a better value. And you get to play 3. So if you want a Silent Hill game for this Halloween and you don't want to get the remake of 2, and you have an Xbox, you can easily buy this and get 2 games for the price of cheaper than 1. And get to experience some of the best games that come out of the Silent Hill franchise. We're at number 4. And number 4 is going to go to a game from a series that this new entry came out, I think, a few years ago, but the series has been around since the early 2000s. And it's definitely worth a playthrough. It's kind of an underrated series that I feel deserves a lot more love than it gets. And that's going to Fatal Frame, with Fatal Frame 5 Made in the Blackwater, which is the latest one. And I think it may not be the best one, but it's definitely one that I think could have the most impact on if you want to play something horror for Halloween. And for those of you out there that like Japanese horror, this series is right up your alley. And it's so freaking good. It's so freaking good. It deserves more love. And I also was considering Fatal Frame 4. You could pick which one you want. I think 5 stands out more for, especially if you're new to the series, it's definitely a good jumping off point, I think, before you go back and play some of the older ones. But if you love Japanese horror, and you love, like, that kind of, like I said, if you love that kind of horror, I strongly recommend this. This series gets very, very creepy and very, very spooky. And if you love that kind of nature with Japanese horror, and you want to give that thing a shot, definitely play Fatal Frame 5. We're finally in the top 3 on this list. Let me see what I'm at. Oh, I'm doing pretty good timing-wise. I'm doing better than the other one. Okay, and this one is an entry in this series that I feel stands out the most for its entry. And I'm going to be picking Outlast 2. Now, I know there's Outlast Trials. There's the original Outlast. There's different Outlasts, and typically they sell them as collections. So probably the best deal to do is just buy an Outlast collection, because they typically, digitally wise at least, sell this series as a collection. But the only Outlast I've played is 2, and my God, I played that last year. I was doing it for my Halloween, celebrating Halloween October 2023 list of videos when I was doing the live streams. This game, and I was playing in the dark at night, so that added to the atmosphere. This game is creepy as hell. If you want something where it's very, very horror, but you're not like packed to the brim with guns and able to defend yourself, and you don't have access to a Silent Hill, Outlast 2 is definitely up your alley. It is peak, almost horror. It is creepy as hell. You want to deal with like cult-like members and monsters and all this crazy stuff, and you trying to go through the woods while being chased by various monsters and people. That game, I forgot who made the Outlast franchise, but I strongly recommend Outlast 2, and if you get access to it, the whole series. Number 2 is going to go to this game, which is an older game. Not older, but like, I think it originally came out in the 7th generation. But they've done a remaster of it back in 8th gen, and you can still access it in 9th, and that's going to go to the Alan Wake remaster. In my opinion, if you want to play an Alan Wake game, you play the original. The original is a cult classic. It's spooky, it has good gameplay, good characters, a good story. I strongly recommend this game over the sequel. Bar none, 10-1, 100%. And if you want to play a good Alan Wake game, play this. You can get it probably good on sale now for like 10, 15, 20 bucks. I don't know how much they're selling this game for now. I got it through PS Plus a few years ago. It's a great game, and it has good characters and story. And if you want to be freaking spooked out of your mind, there's certain games on this list that might be a little creepier than it, but the Alan Wake franchise is pretty damn creepy in of itself, and it's spooky enough and suspenseful enough. I would strongly recommend it as one of the best games you could play for Halloween this year. And before we get to number 1, I have some honorable mentions here, some of which are series, games that have been on here, but they just barely missed the list because I was going 1 entry per series, unless it's a collection, which might be cheating, but I don't really care. It's my list. Some honorable mentions of Halloween horror games you could play right this second that barely missed the list, but they're strong recommendations I would still recommend for you to play. We are going to, I'm going to say Dead Rising 3. You can still play Dead Rising 2. Dead Rising 2 would probably be on this list too. I picked specifically Dead Rising 3 because it's more of a modern game, even though you can play the originals still, like on Xbox and somewhat PlayStation. 2 at least you can. 2 is technically better than 3, but 3 is technically more modern, and it's still a good game. It's not the best game in the series, but I'd say recommend one of those over, especially like the remaster, the original, and stuff like that. The older ones are a little bit better. Limbo is the classic. Alien Isolation, if you like the Alien franchise, that game gets very, very creepy, and it's a survival horror game with the xenomorphs. It's peak horror, pretty much. Fatal Frame 4, I mentioned that with Fatal Frame 5. I would strongly recommend Fatal Frame 5, but Fatal Frame 4, Mask of the Lunar Eclipse is also a really, really good game, and they did recently remaster that from the Wii and put it on like everything from Switch to Xbox to PlayStation. I didn't pick one specific game, but the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, I couldn't pick one specific one, so I cheated there, but I put in the honorable mentions. Pick your choice. Some of those games are smaller, and some of those games are bigger and larger. Pick your choice. It's peak horror if you like animatronics trying to kill you. Doki Doki Panic, because if anyone's ever played that game, it's a storybook game that goes from anime cutesiness into absolute horror. The Callisto Protocol, pretty much a non-Dead Space Dead Space. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is more of an online game thing, but it's still going strong. It's been a year since it came out. The community is still there. And if you have some friends to play with, really good to do. The Dark Pictures Anthology, which is also cheating because it's multiple different stories that you can buy with it. But they're all various forms of creepy, horror-y goodness. Pick your choice, play those stories, they're really good. Alone in the Dark in 2024, it just recently came back. They kind of did like a remaster of Alone in the Dark. Alone in the Dark is a classic horror franchise. Strong recommendation there. The original Outlast, and like I mentioned, Outlast Trials. And the Resident Evil remake from the GameCube, which is on everything now, because in terms of which Resident Evil games stick out the most, in terms of being very, very creepy and very, very horror themed, the original is definitely a strong one for that. So, drum roll, please. What horror game I think is the best game to currently play for this season's Halloween is... I'm just going to do it like this. Resident Evil 7, RE7. I had a tough time because I'm like, in my opinion, Resident Evil, besides Silent Hill, Alone in the Dark, and hell, Outlast nowadays, and even Evil Within and Fatal Frame, in my opinion, what video game horror franchise really defines the genre and has since 1996, outside of a couple years where these companies, these games have come in and taken its spotlight, would go to Resident Evil. And Resident Evil Remake almost made this list. Resident Evil Revelations almost made this list. But in my opinion, the definitive, creepiest, most scariest Resident Evil will go to Resident Evil 7. And that's also because I just recently played it a couple months back. And that game freaked me the hell out. Like, my God, the Baker family surviving that. The fact that it's in first person. It's even worse if you play in virtual reality, if you're doing this in VR. My God, if there's one game for you to play this year for Halloween, a horror game, play Resident Evil 7. It's like 7 years old now. You can get it for like $10, I'm sure. Play it. And with that said, that's my list. Hope you guys liked it. Happy October, happy Halloween. Enjoy some horror video games. And I'll see you later in the next video. Bye, everyone.